Hey, brain guy, send up Quest of the Delta Knights. That'll hurt me so bad.
This time we watched Season 9, Episode 13, Quest of the Delta Knights,
in which a kid sides with Leonardo da Vinci against Archimedes in the scientific discoveries that will save the world. Sort of.
But for some follow-up, alert listener Greg wrote in with the context for the riff from the last episode about saving Jerry Van Dyke's house.
Oh, good, because that seemed like a really weird thing to not have any context for, you know?
I don't know how I missed this during my research when I was looking that one up, but apparently during the 1994 LA earthquake, he was one of the stars whose house got damaged.
Oh.
And Greg says, quote, if I remember correctly, he whined and griped about it to the press a lot.
Oh. I mean, last time you mentioned he had, like, many homes, so I guess maybe this one was his favorite?
Oh, I mean, he was a working actor. I think that was the one he was mostly living in, and I think he left the area afterwards because he didn't want to be in another earthquake.
I mean, we sort of know in California that earthquakes are going to happen, and we never know when. They always tell us the big one is coming, and they kind of do the same thing for us in the Pacific Northwest as well. So, you know, it's always a surprise, but not a surprise when we get an earthquake, so...
Well, and you were in the big Bay Area earthquake, right? Back in the 89,
in 89.
Was it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm, the Loma Prieta.
Yes.
Yeah, that one was... It was really amazing just from experiencing a geological phenomenon. It was not amazing in terms of all of the work that had to be done in order to rebuild things that were damaged or broken. And in some ways, that work is still going, right? Like when damage like that happens to infrastructure, it affects the city for decades.
I've only been in relatively tiny earthquakes. I was in Portland when the earthquake in Olympia area happened in the early 2000s, and it was a really interesting experience as somebody who did not grow up with any kind of earthquake preparedness training or anything. Just being like, it's like I was lying in bed still, and it was like the little magic fingers in the hotel were going off, and everything was kind of shaking, and it was weird.
And then you remembered you weren't in a hotel room and you hadn't turned on magic fingers.
Exactly.
Right? I've been in earthquakes inside of the California area with my mom at a restaurant where she would be like, oh gosh, it seems like the trolley just went by. And then we'd remember we were in a place that didn't have a trolley. So, things like that where it's just like, the earth just moved. And not in a big song sort of way.
I thought maybe they were doing some construction in the parking lot of the apartment complex I was in, but they weren't. Oh, well, it was an earthquake. Everything was fine in my life.
And you're lucky if that's the case, right? Like when earthquakes happen and all that happens is a couple of books fall off the shelves. It's like, oh, I'm glad that wasn't worse than it was.
Exactly. So I don't know whether Jerry Van Dyke did a lot of whining or griping or not. It seems like he was more than willing to talk to the press if they wanted somebody who people could recognize to be the face of this. I'll put a link in the show notes to an Inside Edition report hosted by Bill O'Reilly, quite young. So warning for that. But he's not on screen very long. And you can see a few minutes are spent with some random people in a sort of makeshift refugee camp for people whose houses were destroyed by the earthquake. Yeah. And then quite a lot of time is spent with Jerry Van Dyke and his wife wandering around the remnants of their house and how he feels like the 4-poster bed that he sleeps in saved him when it started collapsing and all that. It's weird. It's totally a bit weird.
Wow.
All right. Well, that was the follow-up for today. I think it's time for us to take a peek at today's episode, Quest of the Delta Knights. Are you ready?
I'm ready. This time we watch Season 9, Episode 13, Quest of the Delta Knights. Travis, or T as his friends call him, must feel like the most unlucky kid in the world. He lives in a world of sword and sorcery. Well, it's mainly sword, actually. His father sent both he and his mother away to safety, but T's party was hunted down and slaughtered by Lord Voltaire right before his eyes. T is captured and gets sold as a slave, but since his leg is injured and he has a patch over a big old black eye, who would buy such a slave? The busty Ren Fair ladies at the auction? Nope. A weird, bearded man, of course, for 1 copper. 1 copper! The bearded man reveals himself to be not like the other people who buy young folk at the auction. He is Beidul, a Delta Knight, and he has been waiting for T for some time. The Delta Knights are a force for good in the world who believe the scientific secrets of Atlantis and Archimedes will enhance and or save the world, but only if those secrets are used by good people. The secrets were sealed away, so they must seek a cave of wonders. And there was a prophecy that the one who would find this cave and discover science would be recognized by their lameness and poor eyesight. Lucky T was punched in the face by that guy right before the sale. Beidul teaches and trains T as T grows a mullet, and T apparently has special map reading skills, as well as other, I guess you'd call them powers? He has premonitions of bad things, which are sometimes helpful, but not helpful enough for him to save Beidul during a prison escape. So now T is down a mother and a mentor. Cue a new guide from the Delta Knights, Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo helps T read the secret map to Archimedes' treasure and accompanies him on his quest. After all, he's a Delta Knight too, and this is the quest of the Delta Knights. So there has to be more than one of them. Lord Voltaire and the bad guys are right on their heels. But the bad guys are all sword and brawn. Why would they care about such a treasure? Well, every scientific discovery can be made into a weapon if you hold it right. And legend has it Archimedes has a doozy of a weapon. T and Leonardo find the secret treasure cave after saving a princess from prostitution. It's a whole thing. They make their way past booby traps, none of which force them to spell the name of Jehovah or kneel like a penitent man, to a room filled with flying machines and so much science. Leonardo is totally geeking out. But evil Lord Voltaire catches up with them at that moment and greedily moves towards the awesome power of Archimedes' weapon. Lord Voltaire turns it on immediately, but he can't read the weapons manual fast enough to prevent it from overheating. Sensing imminent destruction, T and Leonardo escape while the weapon is charging. T blows up the entrance to the cave, sealing the treasure of Archimedes in rubble, but containing the weapon's blast. T's actions have left us in the Dark Ages, but at least he didn't let the world get destroyed. We, apparently, aren't ready for such advances. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, Crow needs a little body work, so GPC gives Mike a loner crow while he's in the shop. The Loner Crow is a tinkering project that GPC's been working on for years, I guess in her garage. But it doesn't take GPC too long to finish with Crow. And just in time for Pearl to do her semi-annual checkup on Mike. She asks him a bunch of questions, and Mike responds in a fairly robotic manner. Pearl is flummoxed. Why aren't the experiments causing as much pain to him as they should? She needs to figure out what's going on. And so she decides to trade places with Mike, at least for a little while. And so Pearl joins them in the theater for the first segment of the movie. At one point while she's in there, she offers Tom and Crow a mint, a lint-covered mint from the bottom of her purse. They get very excited about the linty mint gift, and now Pearl is their best friend. But as soon as everybody's back on the bridge, Pearl is back to her mean old self. Turns out Mike has been spending his time playing poker and drinking scotch with Brain Guy and Bobo and engaging in some male bonding. Anyway, Pearl's experiment within an experiment is over, and Mike gets sent back to the theater. And you know what this episode needs? More madrigals. And what do you know? The Sir Thomas Neville Servo Consort of the Middle Ages, just after the Plague Singers, is there for a gorgeous rendition of Air on a Delta Night. Just magnificent. Less magnificent is a conversation with Leonardo da Vinci, who visits the satellite on some sort of flying machine. He sounds like he's straight out of Brooklyn, and he's mostly annoyed at how he's depicted in the film, which, fair. Anyway, Pearl once again shows up in the theater, this time with a contractor named Fred Eggleston, but you can call him Eggs. He confirms that, yep, something's off with the theater. It's letting a lot of paint escape. Maybe it's going to need some major repairs, but that comes with some major costs. At the end of the day, Tom and Crow still miss Pearl, but Pearl's back in Castle Forrester, which is overrun with people attending the Delta Knights annual pancake breakfast. It's a fundraiser, and it's been so successful they've raised enough money to pay for next year's pancake breakfast. Huzzah! What do you think, sirs?
Pancake breakfasts are among my favorite fundraisers, Chris. How about you?
Yeah. I used to go to some pancake breakfasts at the church that I grew up in. It's good times. Good pancakes, good carbs. I still like a pancake breakfast.
All the pancakes you can eat.
At some point, you have to sort of say, you know what? I guess I could eat more, but should I?
Oh, I guess that's kind of how we feel every day with every meal. I could eat more, but should I?
Yeah, but there's something about being at the pancake breakfast where everyone's looking at you.
Okay, that's very true. There's some judginess at the big pancake breakfast. After all, it's a fundraiser, and if you overeat, you're cutting into profit.
How did you enjoy this episode?
I liked it overall, actually. I thought it was a fun enough movie, though a little, I don't know, dull, I guess. I don't know. The movie was a little strange. The riffing was okay together. It was enjoyable, to be sure. It's not going to be, in my top 10 for all episodes ever, but it was definitely fun enough to watch again. What'd you think?
I thought it was fine. I could have used a few fewer jokes where they're just making fun of the fact that the kid has long blonde hair and is therefore less manly than he should be for that.
Sure. Yes.
Very typical sci-fi era body policing from Mike and the Bots. I don't need that, and it's not funny, and it's...
No, on brand for them in terms of riffs, though, right? You weren't surprised by them having a couple of jokes that come off homophobic, like that's a great name if you're gay. I mean, it's so typical of the late 90s, and yet...
Yeah, I didn't care for it. It just seemed mean, It was mean. I don't think it's the worst thing that they've ever done in terms of making jokes that were mean about other demographics, but whatever.
Yeah.
But there were lots of things I did like about the episode, in particular that it sort of had a few big formal shakeups. Having Pearl in the theater was great.
Ooh! Yes, that was so much fun. I especially love the bots they're practically like leaning their heads against her and being like, I like you. You're funny. And I love that she's like, damn right I am.
Absolutely. I thought, first off, that of course Mary Jo does a great job riffing in the theaters. Absolutely unsurprising and delightful to see her there. And she gets a few good zingers that come off even better coming from Pearl. And I really enjoyed the weird, sweet interactions she had with the bots and the way that they looked up to her after that. I didn't as much care when they popped out of the theater and she started being sort of flatly evil towards them.
Or dismissive. I wouldn't have called her evil. She was definitely dismissive. Like, I'm done with you guys now. Like, you've served your purpose to make it easier for me to be in the theater, but I'm not in the theater anymore and I'm peacing out.
Yeah. And I mean, that is sort of how Pearl's character is treated, where she can be nice to people and then turn on a dime and start being the baddie towards them.
Sure, but how nice was she to the bots? She gave them a lint-covered mint.
And they loved it. There's no objective quality to a gift except in how much it means to the person receiving it.
Sure, I think I would make an argument about intention a little bit, though. I don't think she really cared whether or not they liked the mint.
She was looking for a mint for herself and then offered it up to the bots.
Because it was covered in lint, otherwise she would have eaten it herself.
Yeah, she probably would have anyways. I mean, we've all done it.
Sure. Well,
So that was generally a delight. I also really liked the scene at the end with the contractor with eggs. I didn't think that the scene was particularly funny, but I thought that it was really nice. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that they were doing something different. I really enjoyed them playing with the space in a new way.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think Patrick Bransig did a great job as Eggs in this very sort of deadpan, I am a contractor from Minnesota. Here's how I'm going to phrase everything.
Oh, I don't even think that's just contractor from Minnesota. I feel like one of them recently had work done on their house, and that is word for word the conversation that they had with the contractor when that contractor was walking through their home and checking things out.
Well, Patrick Bransig, the guy who's playing that role, is the set builder and prop maker on set, right? That's what his main job is.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
So, anyway, that was great. And then finally, we have a big pancake breakfast scene at the end, which again, was okay. There were some good moments in it, mostly the very end when they randomly start throwing hard candy at everybody. I quite liked that. But also, that is the scene with the greatest number of people on screen in a non-movies part of MST3K until the big wedding that happens at the end of season 11.
Oh, really?
There's 30 people in that scene or something. It's.
I didn't even think about that. So I know that this is kind of a spur of the moment question, but are all of those people who are inside of the credits in the end? Or are they family and friends? Or are they just randos that they pulled off of the street?
If you stop and look at the list of people who are credited at the end, a lot of them have very familiar last names. So yeah, I think they just pulled in everybody who they could for that scene to just pack it up and make it a very successful pancake breakfast.
Did they do the same thing at the end of season 11? Or were they pulling in Kickstarter people to be in their season 11 wedding?
It was Kickstarter people in deep makeup. So
that's actually kind of a cool way to honor Kickstarter people, is to have them inside of a scene like that.
Sure. Of the Kickstarter rewards, it was the one that was most tempting to me, but it was fairly expensive and I decided to pass on it. I also really loved the Madrigal sketch.
Yes. Although I'm a little weirded out by a Tom Servo with boobs.
He makes it work.
I don't know.
I liked it, even though this sketch was almost beat for beat a ripoff of one of my favorite sketches, the United Servo Academy Men's Chorus hymn from the Starfighters, where they all come out. And then even with the end with Mike being the sort of, fabulous, fabulous, and then them breaking out into a sillier song that he doesn't approve of. Exactly. It's the same sketch. It's the same sketch. But, if you're going to repeat a sketch, pick one of the good ones. But one of the great things about this film is that it's got a lot of familiar faces in it.
Familiar faces. I love this segment.
Yeah, it's got the best theme song ever.
It really does.
All right. Well, maybe not. Most notably, of course, is David Warner, who stars as Beidul, who stars as Voltaire, who stars as the narrator, who really had to work in this film.
My goodness, did he just say every line in the script except for the ones that T had? Oh, and Leonardo, of course, right? Unless he was Leonardo secretly.
Happily, he wasn't. It was apparently David Warner's idea that he could save the filmmakers some production money by playing multiple parts.
Oh my gosh, he's like the Tilda Swinton of Quest of the Delta Knights.
Well, he's also like the David Warner of Quest of the Delta Knights because he had done this before.
He'd done this before. When did he do this before?
In a little movie he was in called Tron.
He was all the parts except for Jeff Bridges?
Kind of. He was all the evil parts. He played Master Control Program. Nice. He played Sark, who's the main sort of baddie inside the computer. And he played Ed Dillinger, who is the sort of corporate baddie, the person who created Master Control Program or stole Jeff Bridges' work in that. It's
a really nice thing when evil the guy really is a thing. And when you defeat that one guy, you've defeated all manifestations of evil in a movie.
It certainly is. I took this opportunity to have myself a little David Warner Film Festival, so I rewatched Tron, which is a movie that I just love. It's a dumb movie in many ways, but that's okay. It's a beautiful movie. Every frame a painting, basically, and it looks like no other film out there, no other major feature film out there, certainly.
Did you ever watch the sequel to it, Tron Legacy?
No, I don't care.
Okay, good choice. Good choice. Stay where you are because the original Tron really is amazing. It is like the most 80s video game manifestation of movie ever. It's great.
I also took the opportunity to watch a film that I have tried to watch many times and never actually made it through. because he's in Time Bandits in a particularly lovely role.
You'd never made it through Time Bandits before?
No, and you know what? It's a boring film and I don't like it, but all the good stuff is at the very end.
Okay, there's a lot of really good stuff at the end. And I think that you had told me that he was evil, and I would never have known that he was evil, right? I mean, the manifestation of evil. I mean, like the body that holds the head that at the end is the burnt out roast that everybody has to touch and be like, no, don't touch it, Mom and Dad. It's evil.
So you didn't recognize David Warner from this film as David Warner from Time Bandits.
Well, I mean, I have to admit, it's been a long time since I've seen Time Bandits. It's got to be at least a decade, maybe more.
Yeah. I don't know. Time Bandits is a visually stunning film with some really good acting through most of it. Maybe Michael Palin accepted.
Well, no, but a totally weird use of Sean Connery as, like, Agamemnon.
Oh, yeah. It's so good.
What?
I think the casting note was it should be Sean Connery or someone we can afford who gives off that vibe. And Sean Connery heard about this and was like, oh, I'll do it for scale and part of the profits. And was like, he was so into it. And I think he does a great job.
He does.
You're right. It's completely what is going on here. Why is Sean Connery?
I didn't realize Agamemnon had a Scottish accent. It's so weird.
I mean, obviously, why is Agamemnon speaking English in the first place? So, whatever.
Sure.
You might as well say it in a Scottish accent. But it does throw off your expectations about how film logic and film accents work. Mm-hmm. He's delightful. John Cleese does a really interesting move as Robin Hood. But David Warner is by far the best of it as evil and is just delightful, especially in that final climactic, very comic bookish battle sequence.
Oh, yeah.
Especially as it starts out with him just destroying all of his henchlings, which is what he does in this film as well.
Evil is evil. You can always get more henchmen. I mean, look at the minions. There are so many minions. Only 3 of them have names, and they're totally going to live. But it's kind of like, if you're a red shirt, as Galaxy Quest tells us, you have to be a red shirt with a name. That means you might live.
There's only 3 minions with names, and they were all played by David Warner. The other film I watched, though, is Time After Time, which is a film that I saw as a kid and just loved as a kid and have not watched as an adult until now. Do you know Time After Time?
I don't remember Time After Time, but it sounds so familiar in terms of the title, but maybe I'm only thinking of the Cyndi Lauper song. What's Time After Time about?
So you should watch this maybe if you want to, after you hear the description of it. It came out in 1979. It is the story of H.G. Wells inventing an actual time machine.
No.
And his friend, he thinks friend, Jack the Ripper, steals it to avoid getting caught by Scotland Yard and jumps forward into 1978 San Francisco.
Oh, no. So are they trying to suggest that Jack the Ripper is the Zodiac?
No, but the Zodiac Killer gets mentioned as somebody who did something similar to what's going on here.
Okay.
And that's actually relevant in terms of how the cops interpret what Jack the Ripper is doing. So David Warner's playing Jack the Ripper. Malcolm McDowell is playing H.G. Wells in a fantastic turn. And Mary Steenburgen is playing the love interest. She works for a bank in modern San Francisco and falls in love with H.G. Wells because he's so quirky.
Oh, well, I suppose he would be. Wow. That actually sounds like a really good movie, Chris. Is it a really good movie or is it just a really good premise?
It's a really good movie in many ways. I mean, obviously, it's Jack the Ripper. So sort of, there's a lot of murdering of sex workers.
And it's the 70s?
It's the 70s, so some of the politics are not ideal.
Okay.
But it's not as bad as it could be by any stretch. And man, I mean, Jack the Ripper isn't given good motivation. Let's put it that way. He's another, I'm evil because I'm evil character. I'm doing this because blah. But on the other hand, you can sort of understand that. What does it mean to give motivation to Jack the Ripper? That's weird, right?
Yeah,
you can't justify that very easily.
No, but if he's going to be smart enough to steal a time machine in order to escape, he's got to be more than just, a paper cutout villain.
No, exactly. He's a surgeon. He's part of H.G. Wells' circle. They play chess together. He's very smart. Ooh. He always outsmarts H.G. Wells, etc. The whole sequence of that. There's an absolutely brilliant line read at the end of the movie where Jack the Ripper is holding the love interest, Mary Steenburgen, hostage right by the time machine as he's about to sort of escape and be able to go throughout time and kill as many people as he wants in all times and all that. And H.G. Wells is trying to get him to at least release Mary Steenburgen and says, "The girl." And David Warner gets this amazing line, "What girl?" "Oh, this one." It's just such a perfect reading of that line. And it's so David Warner, I'm now realizing.
Oh.
He is a guy who seems to have had a lot of fun playing these evil roles. He played all sorts of roles throughout his career. There's a really terrific interview with him at the AV Club where they go through basically his entire filmography, all his different roles. And you learn that, first off, he had a lot of fun on set. Even if it's a terrible movie, he's making a paycheck and he's having a good time.
Good.
The other thing you learn is that he doesn't watch any of these movies.
Oh, really? Ever?
He's always like, "Yeah, I had a lot of fun on Quest of the Delta Knights and I never actually got around to seeing it. I had a lot of fun doing Time Bandits and I never saw it seems like he's never seen any of his movies because that's not the interesting.
Does he watch other people's movies?
I guess it seems like he hasn't. Well, I mean, he passed away a few years ago, but it seems like he had.
So we can't ask.
Yeah, but it seems like he mostly had a nice time working and then sort of enjoying his life. And I think that's a great attitude.
God, we should all be so lucky. Yeah.
There's a lot of other stuff that he did, and he was in an episode of Murder, She Wrote, but we need to move on for time reasons. We also have in this film Olivia Hussey playing the Manor Jay.
Who's the Manor Jay? Is that the evil queen lady?
Yeah, so there's a theory that I saw somebody put forward that a lot of the names in this film are just things said badly.
Okay.
So Olivia Hussey is Fulcher's, who's obviously a vulture. It's Fulcher's manager, but of course it's fancy, so it's the Manor Jay.
The manager. May I speak to the manager?
I don't know if that's actually what was going on set, but I love that theory.
That's pretty funny. Yes, it's a really good one. She's only in like one scene, but that's the one where they riff about her being a Merv Griffin production because of the picture that's hanging on the wall, right?
I think that's right. And she's best known for being in the 1968 film of Romeo and Juliet, directed by Franco Zeffirelli, which, I don't know, all sorts of people grew up with or were shown in high school and so forth.
Sure.
But she had a sort of second career making horror films.
Oh.
The AV Club recently did a little listicle article ranking the greatest scream queens in film history, and they ranked her number 13.
Oh, that's really high on the list, I would think, for scream queens, because there's so many really great ones out there.
Yeah, she's one higher than Drew Barrymore.
What? Come on. Should Drew Barrymore really be on that list? She was in like 5 minutes of the first Scream movie, and she was like in Firestarter and E.T., which I admit is one of the horrific movies I have ever seen. The most horrific. Anywho, Olivia Hussey, number 13 on the list.
Yeah, she's recognized for her role starring in the 1974 classic Black Christmas.
So, Black Christmas, huh?
Yep. Do you know anything about this film?
I know nothing about this film. Is it a horror film, or is it just something that somebody saw and thought, she'll be good in horror?
It is very much a horror film. It is, in fact, well, okay, look, let's be clear. I don't really know that much about horror, but from everything I've read and everything I understand, it's one of the first slasher films. It's Christmas time. There's a bunch of young women living in a sorority house. There's a killer on the loose who's killing them off one by one, and Olivia Hussey's character, Jess, is the final girl.
Oh, okay.
And I watched it this morning, even though this is very much not my kind of movie. And so I can't really speak to it in terms of its effectiveness as a horror film. It doesn't really work that way for me, but it's a really well-made and interesting film.
Huh.
Largely, if you're ignoring sort of the pornographic thrills of horror, let's say, which is just not my kink, so it doesn't really work for me that way. But a lot of the film is largely about how men and how society don't listen to women.
Sure.
And want to control their bodies and so forth. And does it in a pretty subtle and interesting way, let's just say.
Nice.
There's a lot to do it. There is a moment towards the end where Olivia Hussey finds out that some of her roommates, including Andrea Martin, who's great in this film, all the actors are great in this film, are possibly dead, and she screams out for them. And it is a very good scream. If it's literally about how good your screams are to be a scream queen, then she absolutely nails it with the scream that she gives to her roommates to see if they're still upstairs and if they'll respond.
Wow. That's That's excellent. I would not have imagined that she would have been inside of a horror movie like that. Did it spawn sequels like many of the other Final Girl horror movies? Is there a Black Christmas 2 Return to
the University of Toronto, where it's filmed and where I recognize many of the locations from my time there.
Oh my gosh! It's like you were reliving your time.
Kind of.
Your PhD program.
They have remade Black Christmas a few times recently. She was also in other horror films like It and Psycho 4. So,
Ooh.
Yeah. By the way, on that list, the number 2 actor, Scream Queen, is Barbara Crampton.
Good job, Barbara.
And number 1 is Jamie Lee Curtis, of course.
Well, duh.
There's one other actor who stood out to me. The guy who played Wham-Thule, the sort of silly magician in The Man in Jay's Court.
So that not that this movie had me gripped from the start, but like seeing him was like, this man does not belong in a movie set in Ren Fair type times. This is so weird. He's just like a very strangely like early 90s comedian to me. I don't, he broke it for me. He broke it for me.
This is one of the interesting things. So, yeah, he's a that guy character actor. He had a recurring role in Mad About You. He's done a ton of voice work, including in A Bug's Life and Cars and Big Mouth more recently. Mostly I wanted to point this out because, as you say, yeah, it's kind of weird, like, to have this, like, very shticky comedian being in the middle of this film. And, I actually watched this film unmisted. I don't necessarily recommend it, but the one thing that I learned from doing that is that this movie is supposed to be a comedy movie.
Oh, okay.
Like, it's a comedy action, comedy fantasy movie about a kid. Like, the kid is not comedy, right? The kid is very serious the whole time.
Well, no, you have to have the straight man to play off of, so that makes sense.
Exactly. But David Warner is hamming it up left, right, and center and is being very silly in both his roles, especially Vulture, but is just being incredibly silly. And similarly, Wham-Thule is there to be very silly and out of place. Now, unfortunately, the directing is completely incompetent.
Oh.
Also, unfortunately, everybody's doing a very different kind of shtick.
Oh. These two shticks don't necessarily shtick well together,
exactly.
Huh? Is that what you're saying?
That is very much what I'm saying. So, like, Crow makes a joke about, like, are we in the same movie when that scene starts? And it's true. Like, it's a completely different vibe, and they don't mesh well together.
No.
I don't think that's Richard Kine's fault. That's the guy who plays Wham-Thule. He seems really terrific. I don't even think he was badly cast for that role.
No, he's doing the thing that he does. Like, if you're casting him, that is what you are getting.
Exactly. And I just think that the director couldn't handle it. That's all the actors that sort of I wanted to pull out. But there are a few other things about the movie that are recognizable, such as Archimedes' Library.
Yes! You had sent me something about this, and I was like, yes, of course that's the Palace of Fine Arts inside of San Francisco. I totally recognized it, but didn't place it while I was watching it until you told me what it was.
Yeah. Have you spent a lot of time at the Palace of Fine Arts?
Yes, actually. So I grew up outside of San Francisco, as you know, and the Palace of Fine Arts is originally where the San Francisco Exploratorium was housed. And so every time we went to the Exploratorium, which was an experiential science museum where they had lots of magnets and motion experiments that you could participate in, you would have to go down to the Palace of Fine Arts because that's where it was. It's also where they would do some of the film festivals that would come through San Francisco. So it's where I saw the like Wicked Animation Film Festival and experienced Ren and Stimpy on a big screen. And it's just a beautiful place to walk around because it's right near the Presidio and Crissy Field, kind of on the bay. So it has beautiful views, and it's a gorgeous relic from, I think, the 1939 World's Fair.
The 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition.
You're right, excuse me, because that's the one where they had the big old statue of Pacifica, and that's what the town that I grew up in was named after. Anyway, it used to be made out of like plaster of Paris, and then they went through and redid it with something that was a little bit more substantial. But when it was still plaster of Paris, and my father was like a little kid, not a little kid, but like a young adult and earlier, he and his brothers would head down to the Palace of Fine Arts, and they would climb those pillars because it was plaster of Paris and people had punched holes into it to be able to climb it, which seems really dangerous and awful to me. And I can't believe my father told me this story.
That's amazing.
Also, nobody look up who my father really is or charge him for like whatever. It's already been replaced and you can't do this anymore, and no one should have done it to begin with. Anyway.
It's also a beautiful film set, and you can see why people are attracted to it. In fact, it shows up in another film I watched recently called Time After Time, which is set in
Look at that.
San Francisco in the 70s, and it's prominently featured there. It was lovely seeing it in two David Warner films.
Well, and honestly, it feels like it's out of time when you look at it because it has that classical architecture feel to it, but it's in the middle of San Francisco, so you have all of these buildings surrounding it that are clearly not from the same time period, and it is beautiful. It's beautiful. It's in a lot of TV shows that are set inside of San Francisco as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's just a perfect filming location.
So, Chris, when we were watching this movie, and one of the things that like T has to do is he has to find this secret cave, and he has this really like only an outline of a map where there's a lot of things left off of it, and he's trying to still journey to this place. And when he meets up with Leonardo is like, you should take me with you. I'm really helpful. And one of the things he says is,
in addition to being a pretty good artist, I'm great with maps.
And Mike riffs,
how great can you really be at maps?
So, like, how great can you really be at maps?
That's a great question, and it raises some big issues, and I'd like to use it to introduce our new segment, Issues with AI.
Issues with AI.
Wait, Issues with AI gets a theme song, but Familiar Faces doesn't. We've done Familiar Faces now for like 17,000 episodes, but this brand new segment gets a theme song.
That's one of the many issues people have with AI. And I thought I would bring it this issue. So I asked it to write me a little essay about how good can you be with maps.
Awesome. What does AI say?
How good can you be at maps? Well, it's not just about reading lines and symbols on paper. It's about embarking on a journey of the mind, a voyage into the depths of imagination and discovery. To be truly good at maps is to transcend the mundane act of navigation. It's about understanding the stories etched onto every contour and landmark. It's about feeling the pulse of a place, connecting with its history, and unlocking the secrets hidden within its geography. A master cartographer doesn't just draw lines, they breathe life into the canvas of the world. They hear the whispers of ancient civilizations in the wind, and they see the dreams of explorers in the shimmering waters of uncharted territories. They become time travelers, bridging eras by tracing the evolution of landscapes. Being good at maps is an art form, a dance between science and poetry. It's about seeing the world not as a static image, but as a dynamic tapestry of culture, nature, and human endeavor. So, how good can you be at maps? As good as your curiosity allows, as deep as your imagination can fathom, and as boundless as the world itself.
Oh my goodness, AI. But I like the idea that it's a process and a journey that's only limited by your curiosity. It suggests that there may still be things out there to discover.
It also, I think, makes a good point in that there is more to being good at maps than just being able to use them to navigate. I mean, that's the issue that's going on in the film. They're trying to use the map to get from point A to point B, but part of that is to understand the logic of the map, to understand who made it and what they were trying to say, right? They're connecting it several times to things about T's own life that you need to interpret if you're going to interpret the map.
Sure. Can I ask, who do they think made this map? Because I thought from the movie Archimedes made the map and somehow had knowledge about what T's life experience would be, and that's why he was the one to read the map. But it almost feels like the information that he needed to know is something more that T's dad would have known. And wasn't his dad also a Delta Knight?
I don't remember whether T's dad is a Delta Knight. I also got the impression that the map was made by Archimedes based on prophecy, right? Mm-hmm. That there were several things that were couched in prophetic language, in riddle language, that whether Archimedes understood what they meant or not, somehow managed to understand that this is how best to secretly transmit this arcane information to somebody who would eventually be able to unlock it because they understood the context and could figure out how to put the pieces together, or would be working with other people who would know that.
Yeah, except that it wasn't like when Beidul figured out that it was like a link to his father that allowed them to orient the map to find the starting place. Like, that was something that Beidul realized knowing the history of T, and he didn't have to be a Delta Knight or a descendant of this idea of information from Archimedes to make that happen. It was just putting T's experience with the pegs of the map to try and make them fit. I mean, that's kind of what Leonardo did as well, right? He was like, I'm looking for the fist of your father's house or something. I can't even remember what it was at the end.
Something like that.
But the symbol that they had to find was the piece of sandstone that looked like a fist. And it was sandstone because that was the name of the hall that he lived in with his family before they moved. It was a thing.
It was a whole thing.
It was a whole thing.
Well, so I think that ultimately one of the things about being great with maps is understanding things that are going on other than wayfinding, right? That you're not necessarily using a map to get from point A to point B, or you're not just using it for that, but you're also seeing subtler things in the map that are explaining things about who made the map, why, and what they were trying to tell with it. There are a lot of maps out there, after all, that aren't about wayfinding, especially if you look back to medieval maps. We did a whole episode of my other podcast, The Spouter Inn, about the Hereford map, which is a map of the world made in the Middle Ages that isn't really designed to get you from point A to point B. It's not a travel map. You're not going to put it in your pocket. It hangs up in the wall of a cathedral. But it is there to tell a story about the understanding of the world that they have and how parts are connected to each other. And it's a tricky map to interpret if you're not accustomed to interpreting those kinds of maps.
It's true. And then you also have the maps that are like the ones that are used in the Goonies, where it not only has where you're going to go as long as you can figure out the starting point using other pieces of clues, but it also has some descriptions of the booby traps that are on the way and how to get past them, which is also what Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is about, right? All of these scattered pieces of maps in different texts that all have to come together to help you find the Holy Grail.
Yeah, I think that, like, Mike and the Bots express a sense of like, well, everybody learns how to read maps, or maybe even just think everybody knows how to read maps. It almost feels like that they don't even remember that they had to be trained in this. Like, you have to learn how to read. Mm-hmm. If everybody gets that training and everybody is expected to be able to handle a map, then the idea of reading a map feels much more natural and automatic, but it absolutely isn't. It's full of all sorts of skill that you have to pick up. And then there are further skills on top of that if you need to interpret a different type of map.
Yeah, it almost seems though that like what he's complaining about is like, how good can you really be at maps? But what he's thinking about is like the Thomas McNally maps, where all it's doing is showing you where you're going and not having all of this additional information on it that has to be read and interpreted in order to understand where you are and where you're heading, right? Like these maps that are in the Goonies and the Temple of Doom, and even inside of the quest for the Delta Knights, is like, it's more on that map than just, you are here. The store that you're trying to get to in the mall is here. Find a pathway between the two of them.
You know, I like to think of myself as being pretty good with maps, but now that those mall maps are touchscreen things that you have to sort of stretch out. We actually had to struggle with this while we were at MST3K this summer. We went to the mall that was nearby, and the maps were unusable because I guess I'm no longer good with maps.
Let's let's also acknowledge that the King of Prussia Mall is like a campus spread across many different buildings, and their map actually does not reflect that. Recently, I was at the Washington Square Mall in Portland, which also has a map where you have to use it electronically. It's one building, and it was so much easier to navigate. I think part of what we're not acknowledging here is, yeah, you got to be good at reading maps, but somebody actually has to make a usable map for you to be able to read it and get to your destination. So not only how good can you be at maps, but how good can you be at making maps?
And in fact, Leonardo da Vinci was pretty great at making maps. We have a few. I'll put links in the show notes to them, but yeah, they're nice.
Well, at least Leonardo can make good map. Apparently he can use it too.
Now, there was one other familiar face in this, I suppose. I mean, I didn't recognize it, but it was the place where much of the film was filmed, which we are told in the end is the Northern California Renaissance Pleasure Faire, which is quite a name.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it was in the Bay Area, as were you.
This is, in fact, a Ren Fair that I went to at this location. The Ren Fair that I went to was in a place called Black Point, and it was on the way up into Sonoma. It was a whole bunch of acres that were right by the freeway. It was kind of nestled in a valley that went into this small, hillside. And it had all of these trees, and they held this Ren Fair every single year. And it was so much fun. Have you ever been to a Renaissance Fair, Chris?
I haven't. And I know that we've talked about Ren Fairs on this show before, but it was a long time ago, way back in episode 30, on the episode of Deathstalker and the Warriors from Hell, where there's sketches about Ren Fairs and making fun of them. The writers on MST3K did not care for Renaissance Fairs and the like, and were more than happy to make fun of them. And in that episode, Adam talked about his experiences going to some Ren Fairs and Society for Creative Anachronism events, and how much he did not have a good time at them. Largely because he felt that they were very exclusive and cliquish, and I think he wanted the sense of anachronism to be a bit more anachronistic than that. He wanted basically there to be, aliens and astronauts hanging out. That would be truly anachronistic and fun, he thought.
Fair enough. So I should say the Renaissance Fair that happened at Black Point and the Society for the Creative Anachronism, the SCA, these are two separate things, and they have completely separate events. And the Ren Fair and the SCA, again, not the same thing, and kind of have different purposes for what they want to do. The Ren Fair was something where you could show up wearing streetwear as a tourist visiting Renaissance times, but you also had a whole lot of people there who were not performers or people who were involved in the Renaissance Fair, but they were still there in costume. When I went to the Ren Fair, I went in costume. My mother had made me a costume because she's an amazing seamstress. And so, I had a bodice, I had a full dress, I had an overskirt. She had to make me a snood, right, to cover my hair.
Of course.
Because that's an important part of this, right? So you could come in costume, but you weren't necessarily expected to perform. And then you also had all of these people there who were involved in the organization of the fair. They were part of guilds. Those guilds had specific jobs. Some of those jobs were being part of the Queen's court. Some of those jobs were being part of the food vendors. Some of them were being part of the Actors Guild who were performing on the various stages. A friend of mine from high school was a member of one of the guilds, and she ran a calligraphy booth where you could have your name written by her in beautiful era-appropriate calligraphy, and you could pay a small amount of money to have that done. And that was her job while she was there at the Ren Fair. She wasn't one of the people who were performing in that they were washing clothes. Right. So there were some people who would be washing clothes in a medieval style in like a small river or inside of a bucket with a whole bunch of water inside of it. There were people who would be having fights in the street. Yeah, just like yelling at each other as if this is what people really did back then.
Right.
But the Ren Fair also had like big parades of people walking through during the middle of the day, and they'd be singing songs and showing the colors of their guild. They had joust tournaments inside of the main stage. They also had performances that were just really super silly and some that were more serious. And people got to walk around trying to use, I guess, Elizabethan language,
I guess.
to some effect.
Right.
So it's a fun time because you're visiting not just a tourist location, but you're also visiting a time. And they're trying to give you some flavor of that time for what a person on the street would be. But also it's just an excuse for people to be outrageously silly and bawdy. And generally that's what ended up happening.
So what was your favorite part about going to this as a, young woman?
I mean, it was really awesome to me that my friend worked there. I mean, it's really why I went, right? I don't know as I would have gone to the Renaissance Fair otherwise. It wasn't something that my parents did. The performances happening in the street and people just being over the top as a teenager, totally into that. I've completely outgrown it now, Chris, I swear. But just that over topness of just being somebody from a different time and not having the same, cultural mores that you had to live by was really just interesting and fun to be around. They sold you like roasted turkey legs so you could just eat it on the street. I mean, it was fun. And it was a beautiful location. Like it was a beautiful oak forest that was here on the side of the hill. Like you had lots of shade for going through all of this. And you had this mixture of now and then happening at the same time.
Now, were you there in like summer of 93, which is probably when this movie was filmed?
This movie was filmed in the 90s? Well, I guess you never would know just by looking at it. I mean, when I think back to 1993, like I was 18. Nothing seems like it happened when I was 18. My memory is very strange as far as that goes, right? No, I wouldn't have been there in 93. I would have been there earlier than that. My friend stopped working the Renaissance Fair, I think, right in the middle of our junior year. So she had worked there as a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, right?
Wow, okay.
So yeah, I think it would have been the summer after my sophomore year of high school, something more like 91 when I would have gone there.
You could have been in the film.
I know. I did look at, there's a video on YouTube. It's a film that people who went to the Ren Fair and loved being at the Ren Fair made of the experience of being there. So there's a lot of like, hey, my friend, say hi. Hey, my friend, say hi. But there's also films of people doing the parades down the streets and what all the booths and stuff looked like and what some of the street performances looked like. They also have somebody there who's pretending to have the plague. So that's super fun. And I did watch that looking for, did my friend show up? And did I show up? Because if they filmed it at the right time, I could have been in there. I didn't see either one of us, which is totally fine. But it does give you a sense for what that Ren Fair was like, because that Ren Fair had been around for a really long time in that exact same location. Like it had been there, I don't know, close to 20, 30 years before they were forced to change locations. So before that, they had still been in Marin County at one of the state parks in the area, but they had to move. And I still think about this, like when I'm in the area and driving into Sonoma, you can see where the Ren Fair used to be. The person who purchased the property, by all accounts that I can find online, it seemed like they were very generous in giving the Ren Fair, a certain amount of time to find a new location because it was their intention to develop the property. And they have since developed the property. And they've put a golf course and a bunch of golf course homes on the property. They had to cut down a lot of the oak trees that were there to do it. There was a whole big fiasco about the environmental impact and everything. Like it was a big deal when those changes were happening. And it took the Ren Fair a long time to find a new location. But I am happy to say they have a new location, Chris.
Yay!
I know.
Quest of the Epsilon Knights is going to be filmed there.
Oh, it's going to be great. But now they're they're near Hollister, where all of the motorcycle riots took place.
Yes.
And they're also near a place called Casa de Fruta.
Oh, God, you and your Casa de Fruta.
I love Casa de Fruta. Casa de Fruta is a farm stand that just became this whole big thing. They have a place where performances can happen, and they have a really big gift shop, and they have a campground and an RV park. And when I was there as a kid, they also did country line dancing and country dancing there. So this seems like the perfect place for a Ren Fair to relocate near Casa de Fruta. They're on land owned by the same family, I believe, that does Casa de Fruta. And I think Adam would love the new Casa de Fruta location. Guess why? Because there's aliens. That's right, Chris. The things that he wanted to see for anachronisms and not just have something that's exclusively some sort of weirdly historical look at the Renaissance is there at Casa de Fruta. Because when I was at Casa de Fruta and I was country dancing as a kid, I saw a man there in full Klingon armor and one of the best dancers on the floor. He was amazing.
Well, Charlotte, the Knights of the Round Table, Delta Knights. The Knights of the Triangular Table have called it a day and have packed it in. Is there one last thing we want to mention before we send this film packing?
I had one last thing I wanted to mention based on a riff. There's a point in time where T is blindfolded during his montage of training, and a riff comes across where Mike says, and here are the man's eyeballs, and here are the man's guts. And since Halloween is coming, I wanted to talk about that party favor thing that happens at Halloween parties where you touch the parts of dead bodies.
So this is a thing about haunted houses and scary things that happen to kids at haunted house parties that I only know about from TV.
What? You never went to a party where they did this?
I didn't go to parties, especially not Halloween parties as a kid. What are you talking about?
But your mother loved Halloween. She was one of the people handing out candy to thousands of people who would come down her street. She decorated her house. She had costumes. I'm surprised that she never...
Peeled grapes? She's not going to peel grapes all day to do this. She was a working woman with 2 kids.
Okay, you're totally right. That's part of what happens, right, is you have a mom who's, it would have been the equivalent of a Pinterest mom, but in the 70s or the 80s, right, who's putting on a Halloween party and has a gross out activity where all the kids get blindfolded and they get to touch parts of dead bodies. And you're entirely right. Eyeballs are peeled grapes.
Yeah.
And just the suggestion when you're blindfolded, this is the eyeball of the dead man. And then they put a peeled grape in your hand and you're like, oh my God, it feels like a squishy eyeball.
Now, in that moment, you surely knew about the tropes. You knew it was almost certainly not a real eyeball, but a grape.
I was really young and had never been to one of these before, so I was a little skeeved out. I'm not going to lie. But I knew nobody would give me a real eyeball to hold in my hand. It's not going to happen, right? But they did more than just eyeballs. They would also put your hand in a bowl of cold spaghetti and be like, these are the guts of the dead man. And it was really gross. Just the suggestion that this is what you were touching was enough to skeeve you out. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, this is something that happened on TV, not in real life as far as I'm concerned.
Wow. Cooked rice was maggots.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I misinterpreted that. And this is cooked rice. They plunged your hand into a bowl full of maggots.
No, they would give it to him and be like, and these are maggots in the dead man's flesh. And it's again, that suggestion is enough to put the image in your mind. It's amazing how the brain works.
Now I just want somebody to do it the reverse, where they keep putting eyeballs into kids' hands and saying they're grapes and seeing what happens. Actually, that happens in Elden Ring. So,
see, I was going to say that's got to happen in a movie at some point in time where they're telling you it's something nice and it's really not. It happens in Lost Boys.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you've ever talked to yourself in a movie, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Hey, Why not? Our email is info@itsjustashow.com, and we'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our randomly selected supporter, Aaron. Thank you, Aaron. For as little as $1 an episode, you too can be like Aaron, and you can help us research and record this show. You can join us on a friendly Discord. You can listen to all our super fan bonus bits. The sky's the limit. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that we mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/140.
Well, Chris, we've destroyed the cave of wonders that we came here to advance science with. We've got to watch something else next time. Is it going to be as questy and riveting and Leonardo da Vinci-ing?
No. No, it's not. We're going to be looking at KTMA episode 19, Hangar 18.
You mean they made episode 19 something that has the number 18 in it?
It's really wild. Also, this episode was released before the movie we talked about today, Quest of the Delta Knights, was made.
Oh, wow. Talk about a time warp.
Anyway, we'll find out more about Hangar 18 next time. But until then,
You better get out of my way. I'm in a pea-throwing mood.
his cod piece is made of actual cod. Take it away, Theme Squad. I like to think of myself as being pretty good with maps.